Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am your host, David Stregi, and we are here for another exciting episode. I'm joined here by Red Raven. Welcome back.
Hi.
Also, Dane Kyle. Welcome back.
Hello.
Katie Cadaver. Welcome back. Oh, well, I'll give her a moment. Let's see. Jake, welcome.
Oh, sorry. Hi. I'm here. Sorry about that.
KJ, welcome back to the show. I'm just introducing everyone.
Hey, what's up, man? How you been?
And Brandon, welcome back to the show. So, on tonight's episode, we will be discussing director Sergio Corbucci's 1966 film Django, which it involves a man who carries something into a town to enact a vengeance upon those that have done something wrong against him. And starting out, since he hasn't been here for quite some time, I figured I'd hand the mic to KJ. What was your first reaction to this film, and what were your first thoughts on it?
Django. To be honest, of all of his films, that was the last one I saw. And when I saw it, I kind of avoided it for a long time because I remember when I was 8 years old. I think I saw it when I was 8, and I just remember the ear cutting scene first. But I rewatched it actually not too long ago. I haven't seen it in about 10 years, but I think it still holds up pretty good. It is probably one of the first truly controversial westerns. I can't remember what year the movie came out. I think it came out in 68.
1966.
66. It definitely was sure as hell controversial because of the fact Bonnie and Clyde hadn't even come out yet. I mean, that movie, for Americans, that was the movie that transitioned us into violence. So, I mean, I think Django was a great movie. It's interesting seeing Franco Nero in that movie. Then you think of him in Camelot, maybe in the 60s, and some of the other roles he would do later on in the 70s. But I think it's a great film. It's I don't think it's his best Western. I think if anyone is familiar with his work, Corbucci, I would check out The Great Silence, or one of my favorites is The Hellbender. But Django is just
okay.
Good.
Going over to Katie, what was your reaction to this film, and what were your first impressions of this film? And was this a first-time watch?
This was a first-time watch for me. As I've mentioned before, I'm not big into Westerns. So, I never saw it before. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. Like, I think I liked it more than I thought I would. And I believe this is probably my first spaghetti Western as well. So I didn't really go into it with any expectations, which I think helped me sort of just be open to what it was. But I have to say that there was an immediate reference that I caught as soon as the opening music started. It's like, wait a minute, I've seen this spoofed before in Bob's Burgers. In season 1, episode 9, Spaghetti Western and Meatballs. They totally spoof it. But the movie character is Banjo, where they do the whole banjo, like the whole song. And so I immediately knew, oh, this is what they're referencing. So it was like that backwards for me. It was something that I only understood the reference because of Bob's Burgers instead of the other way around. So that excited me. But overall, it was definitely a movie that I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did. And I really enjoyed the idea of I like the coffin, like he's dragging the coffin through the city. Like, to me, that was such a badass way to like start it out. So I was hooked kind of right after that.
Okay. Going over to Red Raven, what was your first reaction to this film, and was this a first-time watch for you?
Yeah, this was my first time watching it, and I thought it was okay. I'm not really into westerns, so but overall, I thought it was a good movie. I thought it would. I really thought it was badass. Like when the guy, mowed down all those people with the machine gun. That was probably my favorite part.
Mine too.
Did you expect that?
No, no.
Going over to Brandon, why don't you tell me, was this your first time watch for this film? And what were your first impressions of it?
Well, this is my first time watching this. It's not my first experience with spaghetti westerns. For instance, I grew up actually with tons of spaghetti westerns when I was a child. My father loved Clint Eastwood and Man with No Name character, as well as all of his other westerns. I think I've seen pretty much every Clint Eastwood western that there could be. And my grandfather loved westerns, so he would always have them on the TV. I even have seen, of course, I've seen the more recent Django Unchained. But this particular one, there were two things that first came to me. One was just that picture of him dragging the coffin through town, which I admit is a really cool visual. I mean, that's a great setup for the character, giving you that traditional loner type. And also the song. I don't know why I didn't see it before, but there's a YouTube channel called The Killian Experience, and he did a funny video, and he nicknamed a dinosaur Grongo, and I don't know why, but when they played it's to the same basic thing as the soundtrack, so it came to mind as well. So I kept picturing him as a rebellious brontosaurus.
Okay.
It was a brachiosaur.
A brachiosaur, yeah.
Going over to Dane. Dane, was this a first-time watch for you, and what were your first impressions of the film?
Yeah, it was a first-time watch. It was not my first spaghetti western. I had seen A Fistful of Dollars before this. I'd seen, obviously, Django Unchained and other Tarantino films, which are ostensibly spaghetti westerns in various settings. Some of which are literally spaghetti westerns, and others of which have that feel, but they're in different genres. So there's that, and then I've seen other things like Bonnie and Clyde, which was mentioned before, and The Wild Bunch, were American films that kind of took after what spaghetti westerns had already done in terms of a darker take on the western and hyper violence and things like that. I really like this film. It's very similar to A Fistful of Dollars because they were both adapted in various ways from Yojimbo, and so it's that same kind of story. But overall, I actually like this one more than A Fistful of Dollars. Just even though I love Clint Eastwood, I feel like Django here had a bit more vulnerability as a hero, and neither one of them, you don't really get to know them very well, but nonetheless, they have a lot of intrigue about them, and I just really appreciated how well it was shot, how desolate it was. The music was incredible, and it was really violent for the time, and I have to tip my hat to that, because the Italians were way ahead of us in terms of what they showed on screen, and it's really cool to see a movie from 1966 be that well shot, that it's very modern in its cinematography, and that violent, that effective.
Okay. And Jake, going over to you, was this a first-time watch for you, and what were your first impressions of this film?
This was my first time seeing this film. Again, like some of the others have commented, I'm definitely no stranger to westerns, including spaghetti westerns. Although the main ones I've seen in that little subgenre are the Man with No Name films. But I have seen those, and I have seen Yojimbo as well, and I did see some of the similarities. I did see this was loosely based. I think Fistful of Dollars was almost a shot-for-shot remake, in my opinion. This one was much more of a loose adaptation. I, it wasn't my favorite that I've seen. Again, I appreciate the historic value of how violent it was for the time. I fully understood. I went into this knowing that this is one of Tarantino's favorite films, and I could see, yes, yeah, I can see why he made Django Unchained. I could see why, this is. I also saw echoes of the Hateful Eight in this one, and I don't know. Am I wrong? But the cutting off the ear, was Reservoir Dogs supposed to be a reference to this? I'm wondering about that. It seems, but the part where he cuts it and then feeds it to him, I'm like, man, that's just.
Which even Mr. Blonde didn't do that, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I also noticed that the font in the main title, Django, is obviously Tarantino lifted the font and the opening theme, and one of the amazing music cues he lifted from this film and put it in Django Unchained.
And definitely when the theme was playing, and Brandon's right, we watched that Killian video just a few nights ago, so it was fresh in my brain, and I'm like, I didn't make the connection either until he mentioned it, but I was sitting there going, man, this is so familiar, and I know I've heard this song, but I didn't realize why it was striking me as so familiar because it was fresh in my brain.
Well, see, with every what's funny with almost every Tarantino film I've ever seen, I listened to the soundtrack first, and then I saw the movie, and so I got very intimately familiar with the music, and that kind of made me excited to see the movie. And so then when I heard the music used in the film, then I'm like, oh, so that's what that was. That's where that was used, and it's just so. In other words, and also just like you look up the soundtracks for various Tarantino films, and especially Inglorious Bastards and Django Unchained, the music is largely lifted from other spaghetti westerns.
Yeah,
and then he got to the Hateful Eight and actually had the confidence in Ennio Morricone in order to get him to do an original score, which he won an Oscar for, and it was a great score. But so on the one hand, it's like I'm glad that he was bringing attention to great music from great movies that people wouldn't necessarily know, which is admirable in and of itself. I wonder how many people know that it comes from, other movies. It's a little bit, I don't know. It's kind of a catch-22 because it's like, well, they won't know unless, he uses it, but then it's like, well, will they really appreciate it? And is it ripping off? Is it paying homage? What is it? So that's kind of the conundrum you find yourself in. But overall, I think it certainly brought them to my attention. So in that case, I would say it's a good thing. But
and this is also a big reason, big argument for my constant contention that there needs to be an Oscar for use of music in film. It doesn't have to be original to be an integral part of the film. You know what I mean? And in doing these callbacks or just a creative use of pop music, of course, in this case, I'm pretty sure this theme was original to the movie. But it's and this was one where yes, the music was great in this film. That was one thing that definitely caught my ear. I really enjoyed the music. It was well used, and that's one thing that I think is common in the Western genre that's often overlooked. Is Westerns often have great music, just often overlooked.
Okay. So now I'm gonna start going through each of the characters and seeing what we like most about the individual characters. So I'm going to start with Django and get KJ. What were your impressions of Franco Nero's projection of Django itself?
I really liked it. I'm glad that the character didn't have a lot to say. I thought that Franco Nero really expressed through his action, through the way he could look at times. Like he expressed everything that you basically needed to know about Django. When it was time for him to talk, he talked. But when it was time for action, he gave us his action, and he did it in a really badass way. So, very stoic character, but I think that Franco Nero did a really good job.
Okay.
Did anybody else notice, like the pants that he was wearing when he had his brown outfit? How they had the stripe down the.
Yeah, weren't those like
Well,
Yeah.
Yankee pants, like the
yeah,
North
They were-
Civil War?
they
the
were,
Civil
and
War?
it also reminded me a lot of Han Solo's future outfits, and
Oh yeah.
and some of the kind of shooting pistols behind you as you're trying to escape. For whatever reason, my brain immediately went to Star Wars, specifically Empire Strikes Back, even though that was Lando and Leia, not.
You realize that bits and pieces of Star Wars were actually based off of another Akira Kurosawa film,
the Hidden Fortress.
So,
Mhm.
going back to Django, what were your thoughts of the character of Django as a whole, Dane?
Well, both Django and No Name, neither one of them, we don't really get to know all that much about them, and that's part of the intrigue. And I feel like they're different characters ultimately because the man with no name is Clint Eastwood, and Clint Eastwood is the ultimate unflappable, really tough person. Now, and Clint Eastwood can be very emotional in certain roles, but the man with no name is just really steely eyed, and nothing's gonna shake him. With Django, it feels like he is able to have more emotion, and he's also not invincible. He's somebody who, his hands get broken brutally, and he perseveres despite all of that. When it's all done, it's not just a convenient kind of wander into the sunset. He's like staggering out of there, and it's in a graveyard, and he's literally the last man standing, and he's just barely standing. And I think that's a very admirable trait for a character in terms of the writing. Whenever you can have a character who's not invincible and who takes a lot of abuse, that's kind of what, to reference another George Lucas property, that's kind of what they were trying to get after with Indiana Jones, was that he was supposed to be the invincible action hero, and yet he often fell short of what those guys were like in the old film serials. He would get beaten up and put through the ringer, and always miss a jump, and things like that. So in this way, I feel like Django, in a certain way, is the the badass Western hero, and yet he's able to be injured, and but even so, I would like to have known a little bit more about him, but that's part of the mystery, and we can infer a whole lot for based on what little we do get.
Okay, Katie, what were your thoughts on Django as a character on a whole?
I mean, I can pretty much just echo everything that's already been said, but I think in general, I tend to be attracted to the anti-hero characters, just because of that they do represent having some flaws, which I guess is relatable to me overall. So I felt like even though I didn't know a lot about his character, I could relate to him in some sense. Seemed like he had some kind of monkey on his shoulder, that he was, let do this like one final thing, get this gold and whatever. He kind of had some big dreams ahead of him that didn't quite work out. But I guess that's more relatable.
Better a monkey on your shoulder than a monkey on your back, right?
Or whatever. I felt like it gave his character more interest to me. I'm not drawn to those hero characters that do everything right, or they seem invincible, because it's not relatable. It's not like real life where you stumble. And I like that there was that aspect to this. I thought he could have been nicer to Maria, but that might just be because I'm a chick.
She was, well. That's the thing you also got to love about the Italian cinema of this period, like 50s, 60s, 70s, they had just absolutely gorgeous actresses in there, and this film was chock full of them.
Going over to Red Raven, what did you think of Django himself and what he did throughout the film?
I thought he was pretty badass for his role. I liked how he did everything.
Okay.
And I guess for the time period, though, I mean, you got to think it takes place in 1870.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, they didn't really treat women very highly back then. So that's maybe why, you know, he was treating Maria like a piece of dirt.
Okay.
Because, I mean, it was accepted back then, you know. They didn't really think very highly of women, so...
I think he treated her like that because she was a prostitute more so than her being a woman.
Right, yeah.
Well, and
I got love for the whores.
That's something that, you know, certain, especially if you try to make a period piece nowadays, that's something that you often run into is the desire to try and soften the blow for the sake of commerciality. And I feel like whenever as I've seen a lot of modern historical films that try to do that, and that always bugs me because it's not only is it not period accurate if you do that, but it needlessly cushions the blow of the harsh realities of what, you know, people who were, you know, minorities or women, what they had to go through in, you know, times gone by. So, you know, I do appreciate it when projects, you know, can come along, whether they're movies or TV, that show, you know, the ugly side of life, you know, flaws and all, just because, you know, that's what life is. It's not perfect.
And I should reword that. I didn't maybe wish he was nicer. I wish he was more in love with her the way she was in love with him. That's probably a more accurate way to describe how I wished he. When I said he was, I wished he was nicer to Maria. I think it was more like I wish he had the same kind of love for her that she seemed to have for him.
Yeah, and that's I guess kind of the longing aspect, and I'm sure that he would like to reach that place where that were possible, but you know, he's got his mission and he's the, you know, the lone wolf and all that. Got to stay true to that trope.
Anti-hero.
So, Brandon, what were your thoughts on Django as a whole?
Well, I mean, he truly does personify the anti-hero. He is out for himself for the most part, which is something that conflicts with a just general sense of ethics that that had been in past instilled within him, that occasionally rear themselves to the surface. I thought that he was very well done. Of course, with tropes of other similar characters, like the man with no name. Another character that I was thinking of that is related to that sort of thing would be a character called Nicholas D. Wolfwood in Trigun. He was an interesting character, also who dragged around a large item, except he dragged around a cross, which was very similarly his weaponry. But I would not be surprised if there was, because that particular anime series did borrow from a lot of Western tropes. And like I said, I mean, the anti-hero, he's not the good guy. He's loosely the good guy. But he can be just as selfish or just as bad as the bad guy at times, and that's what makes him truly the anti-hero. So
well, there's a saying with film. There's a saying with film noir, which I think it kind of applies for spaghetti westerns too. Is that there's no good guys or bad guys. There's bad guys and worse guys.
Exactly. But that's why he couldn't fall in love with the woman there, because again, that part of him is dead, and in a way, you can see that part of the way he treats her has to do with him with a little bit of that piece of his heart stirring, and that is why he pushes her away even harder.
Jake, I'm going to begin with you on asking you what were your thoughts on the character of Nathan?
On what?
What were your thoughts on the character of Nathan, the bartender?
I think
Okay.
his name is Nathaniel.
Nathaniel.
Still haven't done Django though.
And Django. Why don't you tell me your thoughts on both of the
Well,
characters?
I'll just throw out a couple things. I think people mostly covered this stuff with Django. I did like the whole idea. I didn't really say it, but I like the idea of the carrying the coffin. That was really. And one random bit of trivia, though, I love that his name was Django, and I found out, like, I was intrigued to find out that he was named for the musician supposedly, and that's like, I'm a big fan of Django Reinhardt, and supposedly he had an issue with his hand, and that's why they, because the guy loses his hands, I thought that was really cool to read that. I was like, oh yeah. But yeah, as far as Nathaniel or Nathan or whatever you call him, he was a fun character. I kind of liked the character. In fact, I did not. Oh, we forgot our spoiler warning at the start of the thing tonight. But suffice it to say, what happened with him was where I was like, yep, Major Jackson is a total douchebag. I did not like that part. But, oh well. But yeah, he was an interesting character and provided a little bit of comic relief, but also gave, people talked about Django being a little more human perhaps than the man with no name. I think that character gave him an outlet to do that in some ways.
I guess this will be a question for everyone. Did anyone else also think that Nathaniel was a comical character?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he definitely was.
he was a tool for exposition as well.
I also felt like Django just took advantage of him constantly. It's like he's putting that guy through all kinds of shit. And if you notice in the we had the English dub version. The one you sent us, David, was the English dub version, but then the subtitles were with it, and so the subtitles didn't actually match what they were saying.
Yeah, they didn't. I noticed that.
So he calls him in the subtitles. He calls him old man a whole bunch, and so I don't know if he in Italian was actually probably calling him old man and not by his name, but it's like he calls him old man like 6 or 7 times, and then he's like, all right, clean up all these dead bodies now and do all this shit for me, and he ends up getting killed in the end anyways.
Not to mention using the bottles behind the bar as target practice.
Right, like, no, please don't do it. Too bad.
I liked this film myself. One of the first westerns that I was introduced was Django, and I liked the violence in it myself. I thought that the cutting off the ear was an interesting reference, possibly biblical, because of the cutting off of this guy that he's cutting off his ear for he's kind of like someone who betrays betrays the confidences of both sides of the people who are warring between each other. So in a sense, it's like he's kind of kind of like that soldier that was had his ear cut off, in the Bible, in a sense. So to me, that's what I was gaining from that. But one of the things that I remember from this film is that the fact that he was able to carry that coffin from one building to the next without any of them noticing that he dragged it and dropped it down in that fireplace, and he was able to grab the gold, and So,
yeah, that was quite a feat, I have to say.
Oh,
I enjoyed watching him do that.
While the Indian whore was stripping in the window for the Mexicans, you gotta at least appreciate that aspect. So, did anyone else have a favorite scene that they wanted to share from the film?
I think the impact of, you know, when he first reveals what's in his coffin, he pulls out that machine gun and basically just sprays bullets everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I was definitely not expecting that. I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but it wasn't a machine gun, that's for sure. So I thought of how that could be really remade and like beefed up. Just that general scene, like it was such a cool idea, and I don't know, I could see it being spoofed or remade or redone in some way to make it big and huge with explosions and all kinds of fun stuff, because it seemed that impactful. And I gotta imagine in 1966 in a Western, like that probably blew people away. Like, no pun intended.
Well, here's the thing. So Gatling guns I know were around in at least the 1880s, but those were like on wheels, and they were really big and bulky.
And you had to hand crank them.
Yes, you did. So I'm not sure if the one that he was using, if that was like a custom job that he had made or something. But you know, it was definitely more portable than a real gun that you would have seen in that period. So I thought that was interesting.
Made it for him.
What? Oh yeah, the guy made it for him.
But sorry, random reference. One of my favorite Western TV shows, Briscoe County Jr., had something going for it. So this kind of reminded me of that, like that anachronistic weapon. I was thinking Briscoe County. I was like,
I've seen Gatling guns used in westerns before, at least one time more, which in The Outlaw Josie Wales, there was that scene at the beginning where now this one was the more traditional one because it was mounted inside a wagon and then used to mow down all of the people at the beginning.
Okay.
And I think it was all the Confederate soldiers that ended up surrendering, and then they just gunned them down. And so I know that the technology, I think, would have been considered late Civil War. So in theory, because Django did mention he had like a guy that was helping him with these weapons, so it's very possible.
I know what that.
There was one other Western that I had actually seen, and I think it was called Reliquary, or trying to think. But there was a scene where I'd seen in this. I think it was called Reliquary or something like that. I'll have to go back and check. But there was a scene where I think there was a machine gun used at the top of a building that looked similar to like the Alamo, where it gunned down a bunch of the Mexicans that were in the film, and it kind of reminded me of the Gatling gun because of the way that they were mowed down. So.
Does anyone remember the movie Tombstone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kept thinking of that movie when I was watching this.
Good deal.
That's a good one. But in any case, what did anyone think of the character of Maria?
Bad.
I mean, in the very beginning, she was brutally whipped from, you know.
That was not even seen at the time of Westerns. There was no Western that would probably even fine with a woman even being hit, much less whipped.
I tend to agree because even though women at the time weren't really well treated, you didn't exactly see the areas of brutality that you would expect from that kind of a Wild West kind of a vibe, you know.
You can't even think of any movie where one really slapped.
And as her character developed, what do we what did anyone notice the way that some of the females were dressed?
Yeah.
Well, it was a whorehouse, so
Yeah.
you know that's kind of self-explanatory. I enjoyed the mud fight. I thought that was kind of fun,
That was
and the whole
Oh, when
place
those
was
two
muddy.
girls were going at it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
What
was
was
gonna
with the
say-
entire set being mud too? That was weird.
I was gonna say that was like Catfight Central right there.
Ultimately, what did we think of the Major Jackson and his men?
Well, they were interesting because they were I looked it up. So the Ku Klux Klan were formed in the I think it was late 1860s to early 1870s, and it was in 1865 to 1871, and that was formed in Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. And this was definitely not in Tennessee. It was much more formally like the West, and so it was, and it was interesting because it was fairly soon after the end of the Civil War, and kind of still in Reconstruction era. So it was interesting to see kind of a proto-Klan, which was what you saw with in Django Unchained. You saw the people that were the one plantation owner who goes after Django, and the Dr. Schultz, and how they also are wearing hoods, but they don't have the full robes, and these people didn't have the full robes either. They all had just the hoods, and they were red. So I think it was neat to see a foreshadowing of what the Klan would eventually become, but not having it be the Klan, but having a lot of ideological similarities to them.
Okay. And what did we think of the opposite villain in this film, the Pancho Villa looking character?
No more villain than anyone else, in a sense. I mean, a lot of this. He was a revolutionary, and
General Hugo Rodriguez.
Yeah. So I mean, he was, as a matter of fact, he seemed to be more friendly overall than the other one that they had.
He had a much better personality than Jackson did. He was much more affable and what have you. He was just about as crooked, but you know.
He reminded me of the villain in The Fistful of Dollars. Matter of fact, that whole scene where the guy ends up sort of joining them and then ripping them off in the end, kind of goes off very similar to that. I can't remember if it was the same in Yojimbo. It's been so long since I've seen Yojimbo.
You know what I thought was an interesting death in the film. I thought that Ricardo, is seen one of the men of General Rodriguez. He when he fought with Django, how they were like fighting back and forward, and then he just fell backwards on that pickaxe. You know. What did anyone think of that scene?
Don't everybody talk at once.
I have no.
It was an axe and good time. What are you talking about?
Alrighty.
I thought there was a lot of fight scenes that like, well, the one in the bars seemed to really last a long time, and I wondered if anybody else, like, I think that obviously they weren't using like a steady cam or anything, but I felt like the camera was bouncing all over the place. I was starting to get like seasick watching it, and it seemed to go on for a long time, like longer than necessary.
Oh, I really liked that fight scene because it was shot in a very modern way relative to what you would have expected for the times. So I thought that was pretty cool. Um, but I can definitely see why it would make one seasick, just because it was so just all over the place. But I thought it was it was nice to see a fist fight there and have it covered in a way that we hadn't really seen in 1966. It kind of was a foreshadowing. It was much shakier, but like if you remember from A Clockwork Orange when Alex and his droogs break into the cat lady's house, there's that fight scene that is all circular, but there it's much smoother, and there's a lot more of fisheye lens and things like that, whereas this feels a little bit more like a modern fight scene, except luckily more coherently shot, despite being very shaky.
One thing that we probably should do in the future, maybe after we get through with the holidays, is to take a study of one of these films, probably one of the ones that was directly based off of it, and show the similarity of the samurai genre to the Western genre, especially when you deal with the gunplay versus the swordplay, because both of them are very quick.
Who's taking a pee, Dane?
When you gotta go, you gotta go.
God, mute your microphone, please.
Oh gosh. But that's so true, though, isn't it? With the swordplay, if you've seen a samurai film and you oppose it to a Western, really the gunplay and the swordplay are not that different. It's like you start it and then it's over in a moment.
You look at Seven Samurai compared to the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, which was another very direct remake. Yeah. The reason why there's a lot of crossover there.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I could see going and doing a comparison in the future with that. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add to this film that we have not discussed?
Well, I guess one thing that I kind of was touched on earlier, and I kind of thought about throwing something there, but did anyone else feel like Maria just kind of fell in love with him arbitrarily and too fast? Because I feel like I just missed something.
I mean, yes, I agree, but at the same time, we don't really get to know Django all that much either. And in her case, there's in the world of this movie's logic for characters, which is not quite as in depth as it would be in other films. Like for her, there was a much more explicitly stated reason as to why she would like him, because he was saving her when no one else would, and even when he was saying that he didn't do it for her, she's even still grateful, just because the action itself speaks volumes. So I think that just within that kind of limited time frame, she had arguably more motivation than he did.
Tell some jealousy within her, though, when you saw him choose the Indian girl over her in that instance when he went to take her upstairs.
Well, he obviously chose her because she wasn't Maria, because he was using her as a distraction.
So, but alrighty. So
I had something to add. I wondered. I guess this would fall under the special effects category. I noticed that a lot of horses were falling over in this movie, and it got me thinking about, like, I wonder what the rules were around animals and animals being used in film, and particularly in Italy. Like, I know there's movies that probably came after this where, I mean, they actually kill animals on film for movies, but I wondered, like, if anybody knew anything about how the special effects using animals, like how did they get them to trip and all of that? You know, that's something that intrigues me, and I've never looked into it.
Who's tripwire? They would do.
For I don't know specifically for Italy, but I know that PETA wasn't on set, consulting and the different hoops that you jump through now. And, obviously for the animal's sake, it's very important because you think about Heaven's Gate, where real horses were killed on screen and, things like that. It's very sad to think about when you consider what happens when animals and children and actors in general are not, properly tended to.
Our own Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I would have to say that there would have to be some stunt things that the horses would have to go through or learn in order to fall just right.
Oh yeah, like were they using like cords to trip them, or like how did they do that? It's one thing I've never heard talked about, and maybe I haven't seen like a special features of a movie where horses have been used. But when I think about all of the war movies and stuff where they're on horses, or even TV shows, these period pieces where they're constantly horses are always being seen on screen. And I just wonder how they get them. I mean, I guess CGI now, but back in the 60s, there wasn't anything like that. So,
which is such a cheat now, whenever you see that, it's such a cheat.
But if it saves an animal from being mistreated, then it's the right way to use that cheat, I think.
Well, and especially if you're doing something like War Horse, which I really didn't like, but, I understand why one would have to use some cheats like that just because the horse gets into barbed wire and all this stuff that you would never ever want a real animal to get into. So in that sense, I understand.
Alrighty. So did anyone else have anything else to add?
Well, I was amused by one thing earlier, the commentary on the red hoods, cars and whatnot. Did y'all see the little blurb they have on IMDb about why they did that?
No, why did they do that?
So many extras were otherwise employed on other pictures in the area at the time. They were left with only the ugliest ones who were deemed not menacing enough. So I guess with the hoods, they were more menacing, which actually does harken back to a lot of the origin of the hood in the first place. But I just thought that was an amusing little aside. I was like,
well, I did like that they were red as opposed to white because, it distinguishes them from the Klan, number one. Number two, the whole idea of the hooded robes was to make Klansmen look like ghosts and, to strike fear in the hearts of, newly freed slaves and disrupt Reconstruction and Northern carpetbaggers and things like that. And so you evoke those images with a hood of some kind, but then, you make it its own thing. And even the lead major, he doesn't have a hood, but he has the red scarf. And so it kind of, it's a nice way to add some color to the palette, which is funny because I'm making it sound like I'm a fashion designer for hate groups, but,
Here's something that might go along with the lines of your horse question, Katie. Evidently, a long cord or line of rope could actually be seen tripping up the horse that is shot by bullets from Django's machine gun when he tries to escape with the stolen gold.
Okay. I wondered about that. I wonder if I happened to catch it, and that's what made me think of a cord, but I'll have to go back and look at that, if I can notice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can do that with a cord or like, there's got to be a way to do that safely, like especially nowadays. And then if not CGI, then, horses can do all kinds of amazing things in terms of tricks and just different things to do on command. Like they're obviously very smart. So
Remember that
You
show,
know.
Mr. Ed, or
Oh
whatever?
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Oh,
like I'm sure that horse. I mean, they can get
Wilbur.
they can get dogs to do all kinds of stuff. They can get cats to do all kinds of stuff, although not quite as easily because cats don't like to be told what to do.
I think it would be interesting. I want to find like special features on a movie or something where they talk about the people that work with the animals because it's a part of filmmaking that I don't know anything about.
And I don't actually know anything about that either. And I'm not really a fan of Warhorse, but I am sure that that probably had a special feature on there about
Wait,
that
the
very
War
thing.
Horse is a movie?
Yeah. It was a Steven Spielberg film.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Was it any good, or?
I didn't like it, honestly, because I felt like it was very overly sentimental without really earning it. And I didn't like that, like, a lot of the shots, especially the very last shot, directly ripped off Gone with the Wind, the sunset shot. And it was trying to. Part of it is that I'm not really a big fan of horses. I don't dislike them, but it's like I don't have like the magical, like they're these mystical kind of transcendent creatures. It's like, well, they're
What do you have against Seabiscuit or Black Stallion? Huh?
no, I don't have anything against them. It's just like people take it many steps further than I think that they necessarily need to. And so I felt like that movie was kind of trying to appeal to maybe people that really love horses or really, I don't know. I appreciated part of
Questions.
I guess so, but like I appreciated that what it was trying to do was use the horse as a metaphor for the fact that because it goes to all different parts of the World War One front, with the different countries, that it's kind of the universality of the human spirit that unites us more than any war could divide us. And I get that. I like that theme. I just, I feel like Spielberg at his worst, I think, tries way too hard to appeal to the audience's sentimentality, and it just comes off as sappy.
That's fair.
I did have something interesting that I thought was kind of neat. I was trying to find similarities between Django and Django Unchained, other than the musical number, of course.
In the very beginning of Django Unchained, where he brings Django to the town, and obviously they're unrest that African American is in their town, so they bring either the sheriff or the mayor, and he basically shoots him down in the street, and he's like, "Call your sheriff or mayor over here, and I'll explain the whole deal." So they do, and he explains it, wanted dead or alive. This man was a criminal, Well, he kind of did a similar concept in Django here, where when he first came into town, and the Major Jackson came. Well, not only had he shot some of his men already up in the cemetery, but he shot all of his men that were in the bar, and he was like, "How many more men do you have?" "I have 48. He's like, "Well, bring them, and we'll finish this."
Which, what's funny about that very thing? So he says that, off he goes. Very next thing he asks for is a deck of cards, and he gets it, but nothing really happens with it. It's just kind of pointless.
Just to make it look cool. Actually,
I guess so.
One thing I thought was interesting is in the original film, Franco Nero, I think, plays Django, but he's also in Django Unchained, playing Vergo Vespucci.
Yeah, he has a cameo.
Which I think is just kind of a fun little nod to the original.
Yeah, that is one thing I do really love about Tarantino, is that even though you could make the argument that using the same music is like stealing or something, I think, generally speaking, I think that his uses of those things tend to come off more as homage, perhaps overindulgent, possibly, but even so, still homage. And the giveaway for that is the fact that he does pay tribute to the original people. So, like, he put the director of the original Inglorious Bastards in his Inglorious Bastards, and so it's like it's good that he's willing to, pay tribute to the old school.
Oh yeah, I agree. Alrighty, unless anyone else has anything else to add to the film, I think that about wraps up our discussion. So, did anyone else have anything else to add?
Oh, yes. Okay, so one thing I'm surprised we haven't mentioned yet is the fact that there's only two films in the official Django timeline.
Yeah.
There's this one and what is it, Django Raids Again or something? Forget what it is, but but then there's like 10 billion other movies that either have Django in the title or have Django as a character, not necessarily played by Franco Nero. And obviously Django Unchained it's in that category because it has a character named Django, but he's not the same character, even though he does a lot of similar things.
Django is often a man with a checkered past. Oftentimes, wrongdoing has befallen him, and he's often in some sort of revenge mode in each of the films. Believe it or not, after watching Django yesterday, I actually went and watched Django Kill afterwards, which didn't have Franco Nero, but it did have something controversial in the film that I thought that I would mention as a note, and it had a full-on scalping of an Indian in there. So, which was one of the characters that.
Wait, was it a horror movie then, or no?
It was not a horror movie. It was a Western, and it was just the whole story was kind of discombobulated. And
just because something horrifying happens on screen does not necessarily make it a horror movie.
But it was definitely it had controversial undertones.
Speaking of controversy, I was a little surprised in this film, which I don't know what Italy's standards for nudity, what that was in the 60s, but I was a little surprised that there wasn't any when I expected there to be, despite there being a lot more violence than America would have allowed at that time.
I don't think they were really into at that point in time. I think they were into to blood. Blood being shed.
Well, for whatever reason, violence has always been safer than nudity. I don't know why.
Yeah, it was like a hair away from it. You could tell.
I was actually surprised there wasn't any nudity either, considering the grindhouse exploitation vibes that I got from you. Jeez, Dane, what are you doing?
I'm just taking out the trash.
It sounds like it.
He's taking out the rest of the dead bodies.
That's right. And let's also not forget that in Django Unchained you have the Rick Ross song 100 Black Coffins, which obviously Django here he only had one coffin, but it was more than enough. But yeah, I was a little surprised that there was no nudity in there. But that's the thing with violence or with nudity or with anything. You have to ask yourself, what kind of story are you telling? Does this necessitate this thing? Because sometimes you'll see people fall into the trap of we need to jolt the audience here because the story's not working, as opposed to something like Natural Born Killers, where to do anything less than what they did would have been to detract from the impact and the themes of the story.
Okay. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this episode, and I'll begin with Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Oh, yes. My name is Brandon. I run a channel called Septum Sin versus the World, and I'm part of a channel called That Nerd Couple. both of which deal with entertainment and the movie industry. Of course, Septum Sen versus the World is more on the line of physical media, specifically mostly movies, DVDs, Blu-rays, and so forth. We also do several types of top 15s, top 10s, whatnot, and movie reviews. I also do occasional movie reviews for Inside Movies Galore.
Awesome. And is there
question for you though? If it's Septum Sin versus the World, what's the current score?
Well, the world's kicking our butt right now, but we hope to eventually get back.
Yeah, I got it. In the second half, you'll make a dramatic comeback.
Of course.
Is there any movie currently that you would recommend to our audience to watch at any given point in time? I figured I'd add something new to the plate.
Across the Universe. That's my favorite film. I just recently obtained it in 4K, and to this day, it still holds up for me.
What movie was it?
Across the Universe.
Yeah. Julie Taymor's musical with the Beatles music.
Yes, one of the few movies, and I can count them on one hand, that I can sit through all the way through without getting bored even the slightest.
Okay. Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and tell us a film recommendation.
Dane, can you please mute your mic so that the rest of us can hear what's going on? Because I cannot hear Jake at all.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Thanks.
I'm Jake from Central Virginia, where I work in the library and in a plant nursery, and I'm an avid enjoyer of media, books, movies, what have you, particularly anime, dry comedy, character-driven dramas, those kind of things. Also big on nature and the natural world. And I try to write when I can force myself to, but unfortunately it's more trouble than I usually can do. But I often join in on Septum Sin versus the World, and I do occasional solo videos in addition to our collaborative ones. One coming up this week or soon-ish. And I also have my own channel, Corbucci Jake, which is dedicated to nature and the natural world. You can also find me on hub pages, also Corbucci Jake, although I don't really update that one very often, but there's a assortment of media-related articles on there. Pretty fun. And as far as current recommendations, I guess, or currently interesting movies, this week I did revisit Hitchcock's Notorious, which is a pretty good movie. And also, Dane, you were talking about Spielberg. I did finally see Ready Player One. And
how'd you like it?
I recommend the book more, but the movie is quite enjoyable. It's one of those things where you're talking about bringing pop culture out or reusing things. It does work better on the screen than the book, so there's a trade-off there. But I personally enjoy it when people pay homage to the things that they love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I liked Ready Player One enough. Like, it was a very, very shallow movie, but fun nonetheless. Like, it was basically junk food for the eyes. And it was just fun to see, like, oh, there's the DeLorean and there's the this and that, like, it's fun for that reason, but outside of that, not a whole lot.
The book is definitely better. That's a common refrain, but
KJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and if you have a film recommendation for those out there that you might have for the audience out there.
KJ, I have Blue Times Classic Movies. You can find us on Facebook. Talking about all kinds of cinema, classic movies. But in terms of what I would recommend, that's a very good question. I would say lately, I'd probably say the movie I'd probably recommend probably would be, and I know some people might not like it, but for some reason, I went back and I rewatched it, and I was just kind of amazed at the way.
What film?
Citizen Kane.
Okay.
Just the way he got that movie, I mean, he used Pearson every trick, and it was just good. Especially when you get the chance. The story was kind of
Okay. And Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, I'm Katie Cadaver. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I am a body positive horror artist and alternative model. You can find me online at patreon.com/Katie Cadaver or on Instagram at Third Eye Open. That's 3RDEYE0PEN. You can also see me this Saturday. I will be in the pinup contest at the Fully Blown 2 car show out in Okachi at the Okachi Lions Park. That's right around 12:30 in the afternoon. So come out and see some cool cars and watch me compete in the pinup contest. It's actually my first time, so I'm hoping to at least place, but we'll see. And I am also the makeup artist for the horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com, and you can see them also this coming Saturday evening at the Gorefex Mini Fest. It's a celebration of underground culture and art, and there's going to be some live music from Ratbat Spider, Primal Enemy, NSOA, Drown the Lifeguard, You're Dead, Danny Green, and Higher Power. And that's happening at Club Garibaldi in Bayview. I believe the doors are at 7 and music is at 8. I also am a dead girl for Degger's Dark Coffin Classics horror TV show. And you can find us at vimeo.com/DDCC. You can also see Deadford's Dark Coffin Classics at Mighty Con happening at the Wisconsin State Fair. That's also happening this Saturday. So I'm trying to figure out how to clone myself so I can be all of these places at one time. And I also perform and produce for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. You can find us at facebook.com/Grindhouse Tees. We will also be next Saturday, September 29th, we'll be at the Psychobilly Nightmare Freak Show at the Hoppers Haunted House in Rockford, Illinois. So come out and see us. We'll be performing on the second stage during the evening entertainment, so after 7 p.m. So come and see us there. And I'm an editor for Movies Galore of Milwaukee, and been working on some more things for streamlining the podcast. So hopefully I'll get back to doing some movie reviews soon. And I'm also a Tromet with Troma Entertainment. And as always, you can find all the Troma goodies at Troma.com. And I just wanted to send out condolences. We lost a Tromet this past week in a car accident. She passed away, Jenema. So I just wanted to shout out to her family and friends who are all suffering a great loss right now, and our hearts go out to them.
Okay. And do you have a current film recommendation for any of those out there listening?
Well, since I didn't really, this is a surprise question that I didn't get to think about ahead of time. I guess if I was going to recommend something, I just watched Tenebrae last night when I was looking for something to watch, and I've seen it lots of times, but it's one of my favorites. So,
what was the movie?
Tenebrae, Dario Argento's Tenebrae. Also, the score by Goblin, which I love Goblin's music. So, it's just a great movie all around. And since we did an Italian Western, there's an Italian giallo film for you to check out. So, I recommend Tenebrae.
Okay. Red Raven, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and maybe a possible film recommendation. It can be a favorite of yours too, so it doesn't matter what it is. So,
I'm Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I book shows in the Milwaukee area, and I'm also a dead girl at Deadger's Dark Coffin Classics, and a movie I just watched that I've never seen over the weekend was V for Vendetta.
Okay.
And I like that one.
I enjoy that one to a certain extent as well.
The movie's good. The graphic novel's better.
Dane, speaking of you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and a possible film recommendation for those out there listening?
I'm Dane Kyle. When I'm not going to the bathroom and taking my trash out during the podcast. I am a filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and no, I did not die in the hurricane. It was mostly just rain. Um, let's see. So I'm working on quite a few projects. Working on my girlfriend's web series, Asylum Origins Harley. It's a fan series about Harley Quinn. I have been made aware also of a anthology horror film that's done by Tony Newton and Trash Arts. Yeah, that's they're the same people that put out Clownsploitation, which I'd previously done a short for, and I'm gonna make a short and submit it to their new anthology called Creepypasta. And it's something that it has a judge and they has like a jury that will choose the films. So I'm hoping that mine's good enough to get in. But so far, Tony likes the script and everything, so just got to film it now. But just trying to get some smaller things in bigger distribution platforms, and just thinking about scripts and trying to get the right one to make it stick somehow.
Okay.
And for a film, let me see. So, a couple of things. I had watched Jeepers Creepers 1 and 2 not too long ago, and I quite enjoyed those. I think it's a kind of a shame because I really enjoy Victor. I think Victor Salva is a good director and everything. I know about his history, that he's a registered sex offender and everything, and it's like, you always feel sorry whenever.
Wait, when did that
people-
happen?
That was back with Clown House back in '89, and it by all accounts it seems like again I don't know the guy, but like by all accounts it seems like he was pretty deeply remorseful for everything and hasn't reoffended and all that stuff, and then later on did the Jeepers Creepers series. And so it's sort of like, well, and Francis Ford Coppola believed in him, and so it was like, well, you feel sad whenever any person of great talent does something, morally wrong or stupid or whatever the case may be, and they either show no remorse and that's just it, or they do show remorse and it takes a long time for them to bounce back or whatever. It's just but the work stands in and of itself, and I like the first two Jeepers Creepers films. I haven't finished the second one. His movie Clown House is really good too. But more recently, Jill and I have been getting through the Purge movies, which I'd never seen. We got through the first two, and neither one of us had seen the third one, and we were working on that not too long ago.
I still haven't seen the prequel of that, so if you guys see the prequel ahead of me, then I guess you guys will be on top of that. And speaking of the Purge actually has a television series.
Oh, cool.
That I've been watching, so I don't know if you want to check that out as well.
Sounds cool.
Television recommendation that I have for you. But my name is David Streggy. I run Movies Galore of Milwaukee, which is a blog that you can find on Facebook and Twitter, as well as Instagram. And you can. I also run Inside Movies Galore with the rest of you guys. So I appreciate you guys taking this journey with me and going the full effort by going and talking about these movies from start to finish, character development and plots and all that jazz. So I appreciate it. So I think we have a lot of films ahead of us coming up. Katie started doing a list of October films, so we'll get to that. As a film recommendation, I would say I just recently revisited Alligator, which is not a print 80s film. And to me, it resonates kind of with a creature and a dragon in its lair kind of vibe. And even though it's cheesy, there's a low violence to the film that I kind of like. So that's one I would recommend for those out there. If you have not seen it, watch it. Other than that, I think we will end with listening to and everyone say a good night.
Night.
Good night.